Welcome to the new lesson. In this lesson, we are going to bring up a specific song that we've used in our curriculum here at the Collective as a tool to start getting into small band jazz playing. It's one that I enjoy and one that I like playing for drummers because it has an active melody. And it's a song called You Needn't by Thelonious Monk. There's a great version by Miles Davis which changes the melody and makes it a little bit more syncopated, and I actually enjoy using that version. If you guys have the real book or have a copy of the real book, this is a good time to turn to the chart of You Needn't, because I'd like to talk about that now in this lesson before actually talking about the actual drum part in the next lesson. So one of the things about You Needn't is that if you're following the chart or the form, you're following the idea that it's an A-A-B-A form. So those who are unfamiliar with the idea of breaking down form, we use letters from the alphabet, like an A or B or C, to designate the different sections of the form. And in You Needn't, if you take a look at the main melody that you're seeing from the book, we call that the head. The first 8 bars repeat. So with that repeat, you're going to say that the first 8 bars is an A, and the repeat becomes an A again. So that's an AA. And then if you look a little further down the page, when the chords change, then it changes to the B section. Why? Because the chords change, the melody changes. You might even notice some double bar marks after the repeats, and they sort of designate a change in the form, right? And then after those 8 bars of the B section comes another A section. And if you look at the chord structure, the amount of bars, the melody, it actually reflects the first A section above. So you have an A, repeated again, a B, and an A, and it's 32 bars. And that is one of the most common forms you're gonna find in jazz, a 32 bars A-A-B-A form, all right? So now you may ask, well, what does that specifically mean for the drummer? Great question. So first of all, the advantage of a jazz standard is that everyone in your ensemble can follow the jazz standard sheet of music just based on the rules for their instrument. There are chords there for comping instruments. There's a melody there for your main instrument, like a horn player or the piano player. There are chords there that suggest what your bass player should do when he's walking or playing a certain feel. And then, of course, there are rules for the drummer. Now, from a drumming perspective, yes, you can go up there and play time, ding, jack, ding, and that is plenty enough to be a timekeeper or hold the place for your other instrumentalists. However, we don't want to just do that. We want to be involved in the music. So here are a couple of suggestions for you before we get into actual drum parts to think about. You might want to look at the melody. You might want to see what the melody is doing and how it's moving. You might want to see if there are any breaks. You might want to see where the changes are in the music so that you change. Perhaps you're changing surfaces. Maybe you're playing time on this ride and then you're going to that ride, okay? Or vice versa. You want to just get into the idea of form in general to see where you change and where your other instrumentation changes, okay? When you go through a 32 AABA form, what you're gonna find is that the first time through is notated as the head, as the melody. And where you go after that, you stay in that form and you go to solos. And your instruments solo over the top of the form. And as a drummer, you're gonna change. You're gonna go from a ride pattern to something like maybe a busier ride pattern, or maybe just quarter notes for a little bit. Maybe you'll change from here in the head to there in the solo section. And then eventually you go and return back to the head. So the general order is head, solo sections that repeat over the form of the head, and then you come back to the head again. And all that involves you as a drummer changing and moving in places where your other instruments would move and being more emotive and emotional with your parts to help build through each one of those sections. You might want to think of how to crescendo through each section and how to build with your instrumentalist as they're soloing, as they're getting more dynamic, sort of things like that. So if your instrumentalists realize that you're counting and you know form and you know the melody, that's key because they know that you know where you are. One of the suggestions is to go to the recording of Thelonious Monk or use any multimedia ability to listen to music these days, YouTube or whatever it might be, Spotify, and listen to the head and the melody of Well, You Needn't, so you can get the idea of how that form works, how you hear the melody through the AABA, how the chord structure stays the same through the solos, but then repeats that amount of measures and then eventually goes back to the melody. It's a good thing to listen to. Now, as we go through our lessons, we're going to talk more and more about what the drummer does with the melody when that head is going on, and then eventually what they do in the solo section. So we're going to cover that in the next lesson coming up.